What up, everybody? It's your old pal, Uncle Hammy. Oh man, what a week it's been. I am trying. That's what I look like with no glasses. See these bags under my eyes? I fucking earned those, Jack. I'm trying to go live like twice a week, and I'm not succeeding at that. I'm getting here like once a week. So be patient with me, would you? I would appreciate that. It's something I want to do and I enjoy it a lot, even though I know I'm talking to like nobody. But my dog Kamala, you can see her over there on the bed. Um, yeah, I'm not doing this from my mom's basement, but I am doing it from my bedroom. So, anyways, let's see. We got a lot to talk about today. Before we get started with what I want to talk about, like, what do you guys think about this TikTok ban thing? I was really taken aback. I mean, I know how fucking stupid our politicians and stupid and corrupt our politicians are, but like that was real. That Congress hearing in Congress was really on display. I mean, like this stupidity was amazing to me, the questions, and also just honestly how corrupt they are. Everything we've learned coming out since they started talking about this, as far as where all their investments are, how many of them have invested in Meta. Like this is absolutely, if you follow my TikTok, then you probably saw my comments with regard. What do I think? I think this is absolutely their colonization of TikTok. They don't want to ban it. They want it sold to an American company, so that American company can make fucking political contributions and hire lobbyist contributions, and they can feel comfortable in taking them instead of from taking money from a Chinese owned and backed company, right? So, anyways, those are just some of my thoughts on that. We can talk about that later as this thing unfolds a little bit more. I know a lot of creators are talking about it. It's the hot topic on social media right now. My following on TikTok is pretty big. It's like 83,000 people. That's pretty good for an old man like me who doesn't do dance videos. But and I'd hate to see it go, but if it goes, it goes, right? That's just kind of how the world works. So today, what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about this guy a little bit. Yeah, this is David Koresh. So this month is the 30th anniversary of the Waco tragedy, Waco, Texas, and I know there's a new Netflix documentary, and I wish I could stream that for you guys. I can't, right? That's copyright content, and I can't stream it. But you should go watch it. I watched it the other day, and was just it took me back to that time. See, I was alive and I was an adult when this happened 30 years ago. And I remember watching what was happening in real time. And like a lot of things that we see in real time were affected by the emotion of it, were affected by what they show us in the way of events. But we only know like a small portion of what's going on. And because we're not behind the scenes, you get all the behind the scenes information years later when investigative journalists and citizen journalists, do dig into it and give us content and the whole story. So at the time, it just seemed like this crazy tragedy with these crazy people and this crazy guy who, all these horrible things were said about, which I believe, you know, those horrible things are true, right? I'm not here to defend David Koresh in any way, but there's more to it. And it struck me as super interesting because of how much I've changed in the last 30 years from when I originally saw it happening live, right? Like I'm not the same person that I was 30 years ago. So how I feel about it is completely different. Very different, not completely different, not completely different. So anyways, what I thought we'd do is we dig into some videos. I do some reaction. We'd watch it together. If I end up with some people in the chat, we can talk about it. If not, you're just going to hear my 2 cents, and we'll kind of go from here. So I set up some videos on my YouTube channel, my personal one, the one that I pay premium on, so that we don't have to watch commercials. And there's a couple of different things that I want to watch. One of them, and some of them are long, some of them are short. I don't know if we'll watch all of it. I don't know if we'll get into all of it. But I want to watch a few of these things. And this first one is from ABC Action News. It's titled Miss 1993. It's a, one second, guys. Let me get this thing set up. It's a video about the Branch, I believe about the Branch Davidians themselves. So let's take a look here.
It's been 30 years since the world first saw these images of that infamous 1993 FBI siege on the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas. But tonight, as many reflect on the lessons learned that year, ABC Action News in-depth reporter Rochelle Aline introduces us to a little-known Florida group now revealed.
I got to tell you, so I'm already starting. One of the things I have trouble with, right, is, like I said, I was a completely different person when I first watched this live, right? And I will admit I was a lot more pro-cop. I was a lot more law and order. You know, I didn't have the experience that we've had over the last 30 years. I was younger, I was more naive, and I just did not have the experience that we've come, and this is like one of the experiences, right? Like this experience, and then finding out what really would happen, how inept the fucking ATF was, how corrupt the ATF is, right? And pretty much law enforcement in general, finding out how corrupt that shit was, like over time, as we've learned, like I've gone from being much more pro-cop to, you know, I have no problem saying, you know, the phrase ACAB out in public, man, because it's kind of just been proven to be true in my experience over the last, you know, 56 fucking years. So I'm struck by that when I watch these videos and the contrast on how I feel now compared to how I felt then. There, me and my technology problems.
To be at the center of that siege.
Tucked near the heart of Estero.
Have you been here before?
No.
Oh, wow.
Is Koresh State Park that has a history so unusual you have to hear it to believe it.
This was built in 1905. This is where they worshipped.
So to learn more about this land and the people who lived here and inspired the name,
Let me go see if we can get in.
we took a tour with Florida Gulf Coast University professor Lynn Milner, who wrote a book about the Koreshan Unity Settlement.
This is his original pulpit.
It was started by a man named Cyrus Teed, whose first name translates to Koresh in Persian.
He was a doctor of eclectic medicine, and he believed that he was a Messiah sent to redeem humanity.
Milner says by the late 1800s, Teed had convinced a group of the same thing, and eventually they all began living together in a mansion in Chicago.
And then he started having trouble with creditors. You know,
Sure.
there were bills to pay.
Who doesn't?
And he started having trouble with husbands who were angry with him because their wives had left them to join Cyrus Teed.
And those troubles led Teed to Southwest Florida.
He hears about some land in Florida, and he comes down to see it, and that land did not pan out. But what did pan out was that there was an old German homesteader who had come to homestead this land in the 1880s, and that homesteader had lost everything.
According to Milner, it didn't take long for Teed to convince that homesteader, Gustav Domkohler, that he was the Messiah. Soon after, Teed and his Chicago following moved down, took over, and began building.
And you see some artifacts there.
Leading us back here to the art hall. It holds information central to the Koreshian belief system, and Milner says it gave followers comfort at a time when the world felt confusing.
So he did that. He had his religio science, and then he had this. And this is a perfect symbol of how God wouldn't create anything we couldn't understand. The entire universe is contained inside of a hollow earth.
What the fuck?
We stand on the edges of that, looking in at the sun, the moon, the planets, the entire cosmos.
Why do they always like change fucking science? They have to, I guess, right? To keep you away from science? That's amazing.
And there's just nothingness outside.
Research shows that the community also believed they'd achieve immortality through celibacy and live forever in utopia here.
I love this house.
And all over the 200-acre property is evidence of the hard work that believers put in toward that plan. It included building out a home for Teed that doubled as a school.
His door was decorated with
Florida just been
and
crazy
a
forever,
dental
huh?
office. There was also a planetary
Fucking
court where
nuts.
7 women who were appointed to leadership within the settlement actually lived.
I like to think this is exactly what it looked like, right? But I'm sure it didn't.
At their height, the Koreshans were 250 strong and self-sustaining under Teed's leadership until he died in 1908.
They believed he was coming back to life.
And when Teed inevitably did not come back, the numbers started to dwindle.
Well, yeah.
But Milner says a new book called Waco by author Jeff Quinn shows that Teed did live on in an unexpected way.
So these believers hung on. They were declining, they were aging, and some of them in the 30s wrote a book called Koreshanity. And it laid out Cyrus Teed's credentials and his major beliefs. Now somehow, in the 1980s, this book made its way to the Waco McClellan Public Library.
According to Gwynn's new book, David Koresh of the Branch Davidian religious sect got his inspiration from Teed without realizing he was plagiarizing.
His tongue is the pen of a ready writer. So how's God going to talk to me in the latter days?
He was apparently fed the information by a lover without knowing the source.
No excuses.
Koresh's predecessor, a woman named Lois Roden, had been cribbing from Cyrus Teed for years some of his philosophies and prophecies. That's what made her the leader. And David Koresh, almost word for word. He is the Lamb. He is going to do all these wonderful
What the
things.
fuck?
Straight from
Are we tying the
Cyrus
name
Teed
together, though?
in Estero, Florida.
Koreshians and David
according to
Koresh?
this new information, David Koresh only found out about Teed and that book during the deadly 1993 Waco siege.
I never heard any of
When I
this before.
started going through the negotiator tapes between the FBI and David Koresh, the conversations they were having, I noticed a couple pages in the transcript, 60,000 pages, but in 2 of them in particular, where the FBI mentioned that they had a book about another Koresh.
The FBI said, this seems like you're just taking a page from this guy Cyrus Teed. Some of this is straight out of Teed. He's like, send it in. The FBI never sent the book in.
Why?
And I believe that if they had, lives would have been saved.
Wow, fucking who knows about that bullshit? Man, fucking Florida.
Milner says it's a connection and legacy that should serve as a reminder to
Florida
all
and
of us
Texas, Florida
to
and
step outside
Texas.
of ourselves and our own beliefs and to listen to others, especially when we don't agree.
So when we identify another group that doesn't necessarily agree with what we believe, there needs to be more conversation. Right now, what's happening is just total dismissal.
In Estero, with photojournalist Josh Whitston, I'm in-depth reporter Rochelle Aline.
All right, what the fuck was that? Okay, so, I mean, how do I get this thing fucking... All right, so, I don't know. I thought we'd watch that. It was kind of interesting to me, but it wasn't that fucking interesting. Let's get into... ABC did a did a series of reports. These are 3 videos from it, 1, 2, and 3. None of them are more than 10 minutes long. And I think they did it 5 years ago on kind of Koresh. So let's watch these in order. Who were David Koresh and the Branch Davidians? Okay, so this is going to give us an explanation.
I know where I came from. I come from God. I didn't come from monkey. I came from God through Adam to a long lineage of man. Did Jesus look like the Son of God? No one thought so, except a few people in his day.
David Koresh was a monster. He was a highly unstable, self-proclaimed Messiah who used the Bible and used scriptures as a weapon.
It's war. These governments of this world are coming to an end.
He always said that they would come for us, and we were going to defend ourselves, and we were all going to die.
He was an embodiment of evil.
He was the complete, absolute dictator of every facet of everyone's life.
I'm learning the truth.
Do you think he's the Son of God?
Yeah.
He had uncommonly powerful capacities to manipulate people and instantaneously decay souls.
What?
When I first met David Koresh in the summer of '81, he had a car that he was driving, and he said the Lord gave it to him.
Yeah.
He was a very disheveled kind of guy. He was poor, obviously. He didn't have a job, or at least a regular job. He seemed lost, looking for something, and he was kind of a drifter.
He had been born.
Okay, so I know a little something about spiritual growth, spiritual seeking. Typically, we come to that place of where we go on an actual like spiritual path, some kind of journey. When we get to a place where we're like, well, we're lost. You're like, what the fuck is this all about? Why am I here? What the fuck, right? And it's actually a crossroads that's really dangerous for every single person because, it's precarious because you can go different directions with this, right? You can end up in some really abusive places. You can end up becoming very abusive. You can become somewhat of a fundamentalist zealot. Like a lot of things can happen in your journey to have a little bit better spiritual understanding. And this is a story of that going awry, right? Of not only David Koresh, because you got to remember, the Branch Davidians were something that existed before David Koresh, right? He came to the Branch Davidians as a seeker and a follower and ended up having trouble there. And at some point, like there was a fucking coup and he took over. So hopefully we get to that part of things in this documentary, but that's true. Like he didn't invent it. He was a follower. He came searching.
Vernon Howell.
His mother was very young when he was born, 15.
He had a very troublesome childhood. His mother was married 3 times. He wasn't particularly the best student in school.
He had
some learning disabilities.
He was very cute, lovable little boy, very inquisitive, a doer. He learned by doing things, tearing motors apart. First truck I bought him, first thing he did was tear the motor out. And that's the way he did the Bible. He'd search through and dissect it like he did a motor or whatever. But
I mean, we're talking all-American boy experience here so far.
The New Testament, and by the age of approximately 18, he had the Old Testament memorized.
His mastery of the Bible stunned everyone.
He claimed that when he was a child, God had spoken to him and said, "You're the chosen one. You are my Messiah."
All right, I'm just going to say, if anybody in your life starts talking like that at any age, little, big, old, whatever, You need to stop and you need to take stock of that. Okay? That whole I am the chosen one is is the start of a lot of trouble for a lot of people.
Back then, God was working on David to prepare him for the work he had for him later on.
Bonnie was a very, very charming woman. She's very likable. She took some blame for the way that he was brought up and the fact that she was in a couple of abusive relationships. But I think that somewhere inside of her, she was proud of the fact that he made something of himself. Even if it was infamous,
why are they always shitty
he made
musicians?
something out of himself.
Oof.
Back in the 70s, that's when all the guys wanted to be rock stars. Yeah, I thought he had ability, I really did.
That
As
is
he got older, he wanted not to
That
be
is
a
him.
rock star, but to do the kind of music that would bring him to Christ.
This is the Psalms 45 guitar. A lot of people think it's kind of sensual, but no more sensual than the Song of Solomon.
At this point in his life,
Charlie
he's believing that
Manson.
God is speaking to him. And it led to him finding the Branch Davidian group. The Branch Davidians are an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
The thing that made them different was they had a doomsday prophecy. They believed
Yeah.
that there would be an end of the world, and that when that time came, they were going to die.
Slowly he became their leader and then eventually raised himself up to the level of a prophet.
One of the things about being a Branch Davidian, and especially under David Koresh, was you're supposed to separate yourself from the world. The world is the sins, the flesh, the desires of the world, and you're supposed
A
to be
lot of faiths believe that.
There was no running water, no heat, no electricity of any kind. We had to go to Bible study 3 times a day.
That's how you keep people focused and in, is you make the everyday living harder than it needs to be, right? You not, it won't be for everybody, but for a lot of people, just the day-to-day struggle in living life will keep you focused on that and not the outside world.
Women had to wear long blouses covering their rear ends, and no makeup ever, no jewelry.
Why did you come here?
Because I heard there was something here that I wanted to listen to.
David can explain this Bible better than anyone that I've ever met.
I'm here because of the truth.
What is the truth?
Well, you have to find out yourself.
So Margarita Vega was a
Hear the
socialite from
accents?
Hong Kong.
Before
People
they
from
joined
all around the
Branch
world.
Davidians, these people had a variety of lives. They came from all walks of life.
Yeah.
My mom, she was very glamorous. Always had maids and going out and led the high life, I guess.
Yeah.
And then after she joined with Vernon, then she just sort of just let go.
Is he the Son of God?
I hope he is.
I could see that there was a struggle. She wanted to believe, but I knew that she wasn't really sure.
He was polarizing because what he's doing is so radical. He truly believed he had a mission from God.
He told them where to sleep, who to sleep with, what to work, what not to do. He's the Lord of the Manor in every sense of the word.
He had absolute authority over the air they breathed, over literally the food that they ate every day.
He taught that we should not eat any dairy products. And his reasoning was, well, dairy products are made from milk, which is baby food. Milk is what you drink when you're a baby, and we're adults now.
You could have
Fucking
apples
weird.
and bananas, but not bananas and oranges together. There was a lot of food combining rules. You couldn't eat fruit and vegetables together.
No sugar at all.
What?
No processed flour.
When the winter came, in the very beginning, we would have pots of onion soup, no cheese in it, just onion soup.
My wife got into trouble once for telling someone it was okay to eat cheese, and she was put out of the camp.
Holy shit.
So it was almost like he was sitting around thinking of like really wacky ways to manipulate people.
Yeah.
But the
He
idea
was.
was to test people to see if they really believed and would really obey when the time came.
You will overcome through my power. You are mine.
So you absolutely, like, it's okay to believe that you should or shouldn't eat certain things. I have those beliefs personally. Okay. I believe some things are that we can eat, maybe we shouldn't eat. Those are my own personal beliefs. And I don't force them on anyone. Right. But there's a difference between it being a choice that someone can choose to make because they want to obtain something. And this is when we're speaking from a spiritual context, a choice that someone wants to make and to continue to make that choice every day. This is something I would like to do. I think this is beneficial for me. This is beneficial for my family. And there's a very different between that and not giving someone a choice and saying, this is what you must do. It is the only way. And sometimes we get lost in this subtleness. There's subtlety there. There's a lot of faiths that have very different ways of doing things and looking at things. There's a lot of them, and that's fine. But there's a oppressiveness that happens, right? So I'm not putting this, what he did on all Christianity, but there's a taking the Christian faith and then distorting it to a point of oppression, which is literally the opposite of what Lord Jesus taught, is going to be attracted to some people because some people, and there's a fair amount of them, that truly want to live as peasants in a fiefdom. Like, they're lost, they feel hopeless, and they want to be saved. And there's a peasant mentality that happens. And you look around this country, forget the world, but you can look around this country and you can see lots and lots and lots of examples of it. We deitize so many people and then fall in line because we feel part of. And that is exactly what happened to these people.
It was a cult. We would joke about it all the time. Like, yep, we're cult members. But then again, David would always talk about, well, Christianity is a cult. If you look back, Christ had 12 guys following him around. That's a cult.
What's the difference between a religion and a cult in the United States? Is an old joke. About 100 years, right? It just takes time, right? We sprout religions in America. So the Mormons started out, they were cult. Christian Scientists, they were cult. The Branch Davidians were no different.
Everything was a rule. It's more like prison.
And if you broke a rule, there was a consequence. He even spanked some of the adults.
That's crazy.
He became all-powerful in a way that only a charismatic religion
That's a fucking nutpick.
Or her flock. And people were willing to give him their children if they misbehaved. And he beat them quite severely.
Wow.
We began disciplining our children at 8 months of age, usually, because we were preparing for a time when our children had to obey us like that. This is war we were preparing for.
Children obey
We didn't have
parents,
time to
the
argue with
parents
the kids. If
obey
we told
David.
them drop, they're going to drop. Otherwise, they could die or we could die.
What I remember as a kid, being disciplined was like a 24/7 thing. There's
Wow.
nothing that you could do right, is how I felt as a kid.
Yeah, I bet.
That fear that nothing you can do is gonna be good enough.
Well, that fear creates trauma and it keeps you
You're
in
raised
line.
with just fear. Everywhere is fear.
Yeah.
If there was one thing I could take back, I would take back the spankings. I drew blood. There was blood on the
Wow.
battle. I felt like the most evil person in the world to be.
You were pretty evil, be honest. That poor face. God,
But this was what God wanted and needed from me.
We're willing to follow him. We're willing to follow him to the point of death.
There's no doubt in my mind that he heard a voice in his head and that he believed it was God. Did it make him dangerous? Yes.
So from following all this stuff on David Koresh, one thing that I've come to personally believe is that he wasn't like a charlatan. You know, he wasn't someone who was tricking people for financial benefit, right? Like he believed this stuff and these people believe this stuff. Like this was their faith. Now, does that make it right? I don't think so personally, but I don't know if that's for me to say. I got some spiritual beliefs that a lot of people wouldn't agree with, but in their time, but I mean, abuse. And then what we find out later, as far as like molestation and the sexual abuse that went on at this place. I mean, these are all very bad, horrible crimes. I mean, I don't know how you separate those things, right? I don't know how you separate the faith from that, because your faith should be carried into your actions, all of them. But are they allowed to have these beliefs? Absolutely. Are they allowed to act that way? No.
He had godlike control.
All right, let's go to this next one. This will see. I got part 2 here. Okay, I want to watch this one too. This one is David Koresh has multiple views of Waco.
The Cold War was over. I will faithfully execute the... We had our first baby boomer president in Bill Clinton.
Man, time has definitely put a different light on that, man.
Power. Ruby Ridge had just happened.
And at Ruby
Ridge was another one.
Wanted to withdraw from the governance of the United States, had holed himself on that mountain, and the government had attacked him, killed him.
That's another one that happened. See, back when these things occurred, Ruby Ridge, the Waco, there wasn't the flow of instant information the way there is now. Okay. So back then you relied, because this is 30 years ago, you didn't have the internet feeding you information the way it does now. You didn't have like TikTok, which, people still think is this crazy dance app. But like look what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, with the train derailment. Like people were real time streaming, Twitter is this way also, commenting and explaining and showing us what's really going on, right? Ruby Ridge, we just were fed information. Waco, same way. You may have watched some stuff live on the news, but it was heavily controlled on what you were going to see and why, how that was going to, why was it a control? Because they're trying to sell you fucking aspirin and diet soda, right? So they're trying to keep your attention. So it's filtered that way. So you didn't get different viewpoints, really. You get them, again, like I said, later by independent journalists. And now we have like these independent, real-time people talking about. Now that's got its own problems. Okay. I'll freely admit that. But at least you get to know, and you get quickly, or at a quicker point, come to some sort of understanding for yourself. No matter what you believe, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, you get to see it in real time in different points of view. It wasn't like that then. And I remember, again, seeing the Ruby Ridge, and like, again, being way too pro-cop and way too pro-government, and like really being naive in my beliefs that, again, were shaped over time and seeing events like this. Now, not that I would agree with what like happened at Ruby Ridge, but I absolutely don't agree with the way it was handled. And I didn't see that then. I just didn't see that then. That wasn't something we were as aware of, or some people were, but I definitely wasn't. Excuse me. It's hard to talk about those things. It's hard to admit that, a person my age, like I was manipulated by the government and believed that there was weapons of mass destruction in fucking Iraq when the government told us there was. Now I look back and realize I was stupid and I believed something, and I would hopefully not do it again. But I did then, I absolutely did then, because I was told there was, and I was lied to.
His wife, his son.
After an 11-day standoff, Weaver and Harris surrendered.
But it was the first example of the anti-government fervor that was out there that could result in disaster because neither side understood each other.
We don't need the system. We can live without it.
I don't think anybody knew the degree of anarchy that was lurking in our heartlands, the distrust for the government.
God can't manifest his love in this world of darkness. You gotta come up there and find out about God. Come up here.
Mount Carmel was very remote from Waco. It was important for David Koresh to isolate the group from the world because the world is an influence that is constantly pulling people away and distracting you from the message.
Koresh called his compound the Ranch Apocalypse.
It was a 77-acre compound.
The
Man,
men
who
lived
wouldn't
on the
love to
ground
have
floor,
that?
the women on the second floor with David Koresh's bedroom up there too. There was a gymnasium, there was a chapel, a large kitchen, and there was a shelter, a buried school bus where they could go to in an emergency.
Wow. I remember that. I wonder if that's
there
where
was
they
an
went and got
extremely
cooked.
strong sense of family within that group, and they were that family, and anybody else was not.
Yeah.
Anybody else, by their definition, by their verbiage, was Babylon,
Yeah.
evil.
My mom and I were best friends. My mother was dedicated to every aspect of her life. She was a favorite teacher, an athlete, just a good, like she did good deeds when no one was looking.
That's nice.
Sherry Jewell was from Hawaii, and she took her very young daughter to Mount Carmel to live with the Branch Davidians and David Koresh. She became his 20th wife.
Sherry was an excellent mother. She loved Kiri. I don't understand some of the things that Sherry did to our daughter under the influence of David Koresh.
David Koresh became the most important thing in her life. Everything that she did changed to meet his needs. He was very vulgar and very descriptive, and he talked about sex.
Yeah, I always do.
Very explicitly.
He taught things like the Sabbath day was the day for procreation.
The prophets were all given a vision of our time, brethren. Do you understand that?
He did a lot of things that twisted or just drew that religious belief in a totally different direction.
He used his doctrine to fill the
Looks
holes
like a
in
professor
his life.
there.
He was always talking about the things that he feared from society, you know, when it comes to his
Sure.
looks, his skinny legs, his big nose, the fact that he couldn't get women. So in order to try to fill those gaps in his life, you know, he created this new prophecy that would do that.
Wait. This shit always comes down to sex, man. It always comes down to some dude that can't get laid. It is wars fought over millennia. So many people abused, slaughtered, thrown on the heap pile of time and history over some dude that can't get fucking laid. It is insane that that carnal thing drives humanity to that point. It's insane to me.
David Koresh called himself the sinful Messiah.
Vernon believed that a sinless Messiah could not relate to man. He could not understand why man sinned. That's why God sent a sinful Messiah. Somebody who could understand why people drink, why people smoke, why people have sex, you know, why they commit adultery.
He revealed to us one day that, or all of the women were going to be his wives if he wanted them. And I was one of his favorite people.
But how old were you?
So I just knew that I was going to be one of his wives.
He presented celibacy to the single men, single women to begin with.
And the line that was crossed was basically that the marriages are dissolved, and David Koresh is going to have all the women sexually.
Most people probably were shocked when they first heard it, because it didn't come all at once.
He wouldn't tell them everything at once, you know, because then you would be like, you're nuts, I'm not giving up my wife.
Sure. It's like a crab boiling in a pot, little at a time.
God told him who to take and who not to take.
I was his wife. He explained it this way, is God would tell him which one. So God would be choosing them. So in essence, God chose me.
Wow.
That's how each woman thought, is
That's all it takes.
I was chosen this time.
You're special.
My sister became one of David Koresh's wives. She was one of the early ones.
It was a big secret. I mean, I don't think he thought everybody could handle it. I think he thought a lot of people would leave if they found out he was sleeping with these girls.
So I guess she was 17, something like that.
There were 5 of us to begin with. They were girls. We always thought he was going to go to jail because of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, he was going to go to jail because of it. I always notice that when they finally make that move to like, okay, all the women are mine, then they start getting younger and younger and younger because the depravity has to increase, right? To keep them happy and fulfilled, is the depravity has to increase. So the women always become younger and younger and younger. It's amazing.
You know, but for statutory rape, I guess.
He called it the House of David. So yeah, to be a member of the House of David was a privilege.
Being in the House of David, you were sleeping with him. Not all the time, but just whenever he wanted. Simple as that.
I know a lot of people think, well, God, why would you want to marry him and share him with everybody? But it wasn't like that, you know. It wasn't like because, oh, we fell in love and then we got married. It was for a purpose. He said he was God and that he carried God's seed and you could have God's child. And then in the end, you kind of fall in love with him because he was very lovable at times.
Sure, everybody
at
is.
times.
Everybody
Many of his brides were very young, 14, 15, 16 years of age.
I was very conscious of sexuality at a very early age.
Sure.
Carrie Jewel was being groomed to be his wife.
Yeah.
He would take me on the back of his motorcycle and go up to the mountains. So I kind of knew that I was special because he didn't take just anyone. He wasn't even taking adults on these trips, so why was he taking me?
She was very young. I think she was 11 at the time.
She let it come out that her mom had taken her to a hotel room and that David Koresh was there waiting.
And he was laying on the bed and he said, "Come over here."
He had made her take off her clothes and get into bed. And I don't think I asked her for a lot more details at that point.
This happens in every faith. That is, I know we hear about it a lot in Christian-based faiths because it's one of the largest in the world. And it is the most prevalent in our society. But this sort of distortion and abuse happens in every faith, in every country, everywhere. And it is always centered around sex. Now, I'm not anti-faith. I'm not anti-religion. In fact, if you know me, I'm very prayerful man. I'm not Christian, but I'm a very prayerful man. But this is the most common thing you hear. When you hear, and it distorts us and pushes us away from seeking, live a spiritual life. And it's understandable. It's understandable.
I knew enough.
I think that at a very early age, I gained the ability to almost exit my body and just not be there.
Yeah.
A wall would just come up instantly and I would be gone.
This is just disgusting. It's sick and it's perverted, and yeah, that's one of the things about David Koresh that probably bothers me the most. And my own participation, and I'm ashamed of it. I am. I wish I would have done something. I don't know what I would have done, but I wish I would have done something.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet.
How could Sherry allow that? That was part of what her job was. Not only did she give of herself, she gave everything she had to give, including her daughter. And she expected the same of Kiri.
Yeah.
Well, there came a time when I was no longer the most important thing in her life, and David Koresh was. And it wasn't even her own salvation that was important. It was just doing what he said was the most important thing.
So
She listened to the wrong guy. She went.
All right, let's watch the third one. Hope you guys aren't getting bored. I don't care if you are, because it's really just me here. Where's the third one? Oh, I think this is it right here. Let's go back. Yeah, part 3. Guns, America's favorite.
Most people in Texas have been around guns since they were small children. You grew up with guns.
Squeeze it, don't pull it.
I'm not from Texas, but I did too.
It was just a rite of passage for most young men.
That's it.
It's what people did. It was a good time. People would have barbecues and shoot on the prairie.
Get more potatoes on how you like it.
Now, big man you just saw, I think his last name's Thibodeau. He's got a crazy fucking story. He's featured a lot in the current Netflix documentary, which I highly recommend you go watch. But how he escaped and at the very end during the fire is amazing. It's amazing. I was kind of riveted by it.
I'll fight you for it.
God and guns is exactly what sums up Waco, Texas.
I have firearms. Everybody has firearms. Texas has open carry and concealed carry. Okay, and I'm never going to pull my weapon unless someone pulls one on me. Just to go around and brandishing weapons, that ain't happening. That wasn't Mount Carmel either. Those people weren't that way.
Every once in a while, we would get a report that there was gunfire out there.
David Koresh preached from the very beginning that he wanted to militarize his followers. And he started going to gun shows and purchasing huge amounts of weaponry, ammunition.
He thought that the end of all time, the end of the world would come in a great battle between the faithful and the beast of Babylon, who he specifically identified as the government of the United States of America.
Yeah.
It's war.
Might be right.
These governments of this world are coming to an end. Go ahead and laugh. Go ahead and muse in your mind and see what happens to you.
They would shoot and have target practice, and there was always somebody up at the guard post 24 hours a day with a gun.
You know, all you were taught was, this is what this gun looks like. This is what this helicopter looks like. When you see it, this is what you do. You're supposed to go inside.
I guess they were right, though.
An adult, and they would sound some kind of alarm.
I mean, a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but, you know, they were kind of right.
To, like, stick it in your mouth and point up. You know, and now, looking back, I can see, well, why would we have been talking about that stuff if it wasn't a reality, or if we weren't planning to do it?
They prepared you for war, because that's what the belief was. Everything
Which it came.
had to be military style. My mom's job was to sew the vest, bulletproof vests that they were using for protection. There
Wow.
was just this level of
I didn't know that.
an impending doom.
Did Jesus tell the apostles to carry a sword with you? Yes. Peter cut off a centurion's ear. Jesus put it back on. So in a time of war, nations against nations, when someone hurts somebody else because the government says to fight,
in his theology, that it was the responsibility of the elect, of the faithful, to fight as hard as they could, to take up arms. And that would bring down the host of angels that would bring about the end of time.
Well, he'd been saying for such a long time that they were going to come for us. And then they did. They came.
Yeah, they did.
And they did exactly what he said.
He absolutely did. They came. They came hard
One
too.
of the reasons that the Branch Davidians started to get investigated by the ATF was because one day a delivery man for UPS delivered a box of grenades to David Koresh, and the box broke open.
I'm just gonna have these grenades sent to the fucking house. Only in rural Texas, man.
The sheriff's office received this information. We shared it with ATF. You start wondering about what is this all about? And you start thinking about the automatic gunfire reports that you'd had a year or two earlier. And you're wondering what exactly is happening out there.
It was around June 1992, and I was actually working the ATF hotline desk. And my buddy called me up, says, listen, I've got an investigation. It involves a group of people, it's like a religious group, a cult.
Yeah.
The investigation was into illegal firearms manufacturing, and then there was also allegations that child abuse was being conducted by David Koresh.
We're going to remove that animal.
Which
from
all that was true. Okay,
The
so all that was
operation
true.
Was named Operation Trojan Horse.
There were 77 agents actually involved in the initial raid on the compound.
So the ATF has a right to go investigate and most likely do some sort of raid. They do. Okay. It's not just firearms. There is illegal unregistered firearms. Whether you think that should be a law or not doesn't change the fact that it was. And there was child abuse and specifically sexual abuse going on. And so it's not really just a case of, live and let live and religious persecution.
More than a simple search warrant. Honestly, it felt more like a military operation.
We had kind of staked out a mock compound, and then over the course of a couple of days, we ran through a series of mock search warrant executions.
We were to go up and secure the arms room and the Koresh's bedroom. The Dallas team was scheduled to go in through the front door and go up to the second floor and clear the second floor, and that's where we understood most of the women and children would be. The Houston team would clear the bottom floor. The men all lived on the first floor. The rest of the team would go out and form a perimeter around the construction area and keep anybody working in the construction area from getting back into the compound. We were outgunned to the max, so needing to get inside and make sure that we kept them from getting to their weapons was extremely important.
Even though I'd run hundreds of warrants with the special response team, nothing to this scale.
Usually we'd just be hitting a single house with maybe 1 or 2 people inside, but this time we were hitting a large structure that had as many as 150 people on the inside.
That's
You
pretty
just have
big.
to have a really, really ridiculously stupid plan that put them in that position, which should never happen.
Several of us agents looked around at each other and said, no matter what, this is going, because look at how much money is being spent.
The undercover part of the investigation involved ATF setting up across the street from the compound.
They put in 4 40-year-old ATF officers to pretend that they were students.
And when
What
they
the
were moving,
fuck?
they didn't move in furniture, they moved in equipment, that it was in cases. So it was very suspicious, needless
Right.
to say, right off the bat.
Fucking
They installed several
dum-dums.
special agents in there. One of them in particular was Robert Rodriguez.
Robert Rodriguez was an ATF officer.
I always think that's the
who
same
they
name as a Night
planted
Stalker.
Into the Branch
That's Richard
Davidians
Rodriguez.
to join the Branch Davidians.
Or maybe they're related.
At the very beginning of their investigation.
He was there to try to infiltrate the Branch Davidians to find out the extent of their engagement with automatic weapons, grenades, and things of that nature.
Robert Rodriguez's role, I think, is much bigger than anybody really anticipated, because he was really the voice of what was going on inside Mount Carmel. He was witness to the control that David Koresh had over all these people.
If you sin against the
My understanding is he kind of infiltrated the Branch Davidians by showing up and going to meetings and sermons for a while. I learned that in some other documentaries where at that house, that other farmhouse they were at, that they could see each other. It wasn't so far away that you couldn't see each other, but they weren't exactly next door to each other. The Branch Davidian compound and the little farmhouse where the 4 agents were at. But Robert Rodriguez was integrating himself into the Branch Davidian community. Now, they had their suspicions about him, but being a religious community, they also wanted to, I guess, I wouldn't say welcome, but they want to get their word out. So he was allowed to be inside some.
Spirit, Christians, can it be forgiven?
Do you feel you're special?
Well, if I'm special, it's because people think I'm special.
The FBI underestimated the charismatic control that David Koresh had over this faith community.
David Koresh was training soldiers for God.
These were religious zealots.
These are people who believe that the apocalypse is going to come when the American government starts it. That played right into their own understanding of what God's teaching was and how history was going to unfold.
All right.
Every step they took.
Okay, so let's go to inside the 1993 shootout between federal agents and, was this one we watched?
Videotape the beating of Rodney King takes the stand.
The satellite picture shows
All right.
a few clouds over the
Now this is part 4.
Videotape the beating of
I want to
Rodney
get to
King
this.
takes
This,
the stand.
if it's not in this video, it'll be one of the others.
Clouds over the northeastern corner of the state. Temperature of 47 degrees in Waco.
I remember it being a cold day, drizzly, overcast. I remember driving, thinking, okay, we're really out in the country. This is a rural operation.
Making the short trip.
See where this, so there's this compound and these religious fanatics live there, and it's not the fact that they're religious fanatics, but it's some of the stuff that's being perpetrated upon the members by basically David Koresh, and how some of the ways that they're living that is absolutely illegal in this country. That's all valid. Okay. So now there's the way that it's handled. So even though what's going on there is invalid, the way that the government handled it was absolutely atrocious. Not only was it atrocious, there's rights that are violated, and there are lies that are told, and it was a horrible, horrible tragedy in our country's history that did not need to fucking happen. Fact, it could have been handled differently, and it could have been handled much, much better.
The Branch Davidian compound, because I was going in first, a lot of things just go through your mind.
There was a news crew from a local television station that had learned of the impending search warrant. In their quest to get a breaking story, they got lost.
There was a mailman who saw members of the media and asked what was going on.
The postman turned out to be a Davidian.
He immediately went back and advised David Koresh that the ATF was on their way.
Robert Rodriguez had gone in on that Sunday morning, and he was kind of get a feel for what was going on there.
David Koresh sat Robert Rodriguez down and said, I know you're a plant. I know they're coming.
Koresh came back, he told Robert, he said, they're coming for me. ATF and the National Guard, they got me once, but they'll never get me again.
He shook Robert's hand and said, good luck.
So he went back to the ATF commanders and said, they know we're coming, but they didn't listen to him.
I told them what happened inside the compound. I advised them that Koresh knew. I advised all the people in the undercover house. They know we're coming. As long as I live, I'll remember those words.
I don't think a lot of those agents wanted to go through with it.
I followed orders. I got ready and I went.
One of the biggest mistakes I made was not just stopping there and saying, look, we can't go. We've lost the element of surprise. We got to call this raid off.
They got to a point of no return. David Koresh knows you're coming. This is going to be a bloodbath.
The choppers are coming in across the creek bottom from the northeast, and they were coming directly towards me. They broke over towards Mount Carmel.
I could hear something rumbling, and it's coming right at us. I could see inside the back of the trailer, and it didn't have cattle in it. It had ATF agents.
We see a little SUV behind us, and it's the media. Everybody in the back are like, hey, what are they doing here?
The two trucks and the trailers had turned onto the property now.
When we pulled in, somebody came over the radio and said there's nobody outside.
They were walking into an ambush.
We had close to 150 people sitting inside this building, and we were going to try to make entry through the front door and through windows on the roof. It was very spooky.
I was still in my pajamas, and I was sitting on the top bunk. I was looking out the window, and you just see all these black dots coming at you like little ants.
I recall stepping out of the truck. Almost immediately, I started hearing pops. Pop, pop, pop.
They were never able to determine who really shot that first shot.
I bet they fucking know.
Shot at. Got like 6 rounds.
And it's like everybody starts shooting at once. You couldn't hear anything.
I looked out the window and saw tons of people in black clothes jumping out and running toward us with guns.
David came down the hallway and he said, I don't want anybody to do anything stupid. I'm gonna go talk to them. So don't take any action in your own hands. Let me handle it.
Heard him open the front door, and the next thing I hear him yelling out, hey, wait a minute, you know, there's women and children in here.
I look up and I see Vernon Howell at the door, and I was running straight at him, yelling at him, police, search warrant. He backed up and he shut the door.
And then all these bullets started coming from the outside in.
The minute David got shot, there was people that retaliated.
It seemed like a pop here, a pop there, and then boom, 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 pops everywhere.
All of a sudden, I'm seeing just holes appear in front of me. And at that point, it was like, wake up, stupid, they're shooting at you.
Just as they started firing, my mom ran into the room and she grabbed me. She put me on the floor and she put her body over me because she was trying to protect me.
All these bullets were coming through the window above my son's head.
Now, okay. Think this through for a second. If you're watching this and you live in the U.S., there's a really good chance you have firearms because we're gun crazy in this fucking country. So you are being attacked. You are being shot at. Forget the fact that they're wearing badges. You're being attacked and you're being shot at. What are you going to do? You know exactly what you're going to do. You're going to defend yourself. You're going to defend your family. You're going to defend yourself and you're going to defend your family. And that is absolutely what's going on here. Now, I don't know who shot first. I have a feeling that it was either a very angry Branch Davidian who was ready to fire off the apocalypse and probably did it of his or her own volition, or it was a gung-ho fucking ATF agent, and that's actually where I'd put my money. But once the shooting started, there was zero voice of reason. And the genie was out of the bottle at that point. And it went for 51 days. Now, they didn't shoot for 51 days. But the standoff went for 51 days after people had been killed. And then the genie's out of the bottle and you can't put it back in.
All that glass started falling in his face. All I could do was sit there and wonder what's going to happen next.
I saw a couple of ATF agents put the ladder up and they're going up. And I said, all right, we got to shoot this video.
There was a lot of rounds coming by. You could
I remember watching this live.
I thought they were going to
I remember watching exactly this live.
I stepped through the window and went into the room.
This is the guy that just went in.
Shooting through the walls at us. I took 2 AK rounds, one in my thigh and one in my hip. I remember falling down and trying to get up.
You're looking at mortality in the face and thinking like, damn, I'm not gonna get out of this thing.
One of our agents returned fire and he was shot in the head. It was the day before his 26th birthday.
I remember walking through the hall and you could see bodies on the floor. And my mom had left me under the bed. I don't really remember much after that.
3, 2. The first firefight was probably 30 minutes nonstop. And I'm doing a play-by-play. There are confirmed casualties inside, and there are 2 or 3 officers hit. An ATF agent yells at me.
Hey! Ambulance!
Run to your truck and call for help.
Ambulance, got it!
That's when we began hearing that different ones had been shot. As I got close to the entryway, I could hear water running, and I thought, that's strange. Turned to go in, and somebody's laying on the floor in a pool of blood and water.
They said 16 wounded, 4 dead.
Our coming there that morning was in fulfillment of a prophecy that David Koresh had. This is the way it's gonna end.
And it played right
the hands
into
of the beast, and we were supposed to be the beast.
You guys were the beast.
Hi everyone, George Steph.
So, okay, there's a longer video I want to jump to, and I think I'm going to just kind of jump to towards the end of it.
And this was also
when we get into this. I think we'll start here because I want to get towards the end of what happened and how it ended.
And two leaders would emerge to speak for the group. Koresh, of course, was the first, but Steve Schneider emerged as Koresh's right-hand man and spokesman. The two had a unique relationship, to say the least. Koresh had had a child with Schneider's wife, Judy, like he had many other married members. But Schneider was the only man allowed to carry on sleeping with his own wife. Over the duration of the 51-day standoff, there were a total of 754 calls between authorities and the Branch Davidians.
Okay, so the big firefight in the beginning has happened, right? 4 ATF officers are dead. I don't remember how many in the compound. The like 16 are injured. It lasted like 2 hours. Everybody pulls back, and this is when negotiations start. And they go for 51 days, the negotiations, the press conferences, and like the whole country completely affixed at what's happening in Waco, Texas. It's like time stood still for 51 days, and we were all affixed and paying attention to our televisions and trying to understand, like, when is this going to end? When's it all going to end? Any minute now, what's going to happen next?
Usually by Koresh or Schneider. The FBI would also use the daily press briefings to communicate to those in the compound as well. Here, David Koresh talks to negotiators about the ATF getting their dead and wounded off the property.
Okay, don't hang up, David, okay? I'm going to get somebody to talk to you.
Yeah, this Lynch.
Hey, Lynch?
Yeah.
That's kind of a funny name there. Oh, listen, no,
Now, who am I speaking with?
This is David Koresh.
Okay, David.
The Notorious.
David,
The Notorious.
What I'm doing is I'm trying to establish some communication links with you.
No. Let me tell you something.
Yes, sir.
You see, you brought a bunch of guys out here and you killed some of my children. We told you we wanted to talk. How come you try to be so big all the time?
Okay, David.
Now, there's a bunch of us dead. There's a bunch of you guys dead. Now that's your fault.
Okay, let's try to resolve this now. All right, we're going to send in 4 ATF agents. Can you pass that word?
Well, I tell you what. What are they going to be dressed in?
Pardon me?
Are they going to be dressed in white, unarmed?
All right, stand by.
The negotiations started off rocky. In another call later that day, you can hear that Koresh and negotiators are having a hard time agreeing on what had taken place, with the ATF claiming that no shots were fired from the helicopters, before slowly backpedaling.
Now, Jim, you're a damn liar. Now, let's get real. You listen to me. You're sitting there and telling me that there were no guns on that helicopter?
I said they didn't shoot. There's no gun shot.
You are a damn liar.
Well, just calm down.
And, let me tell you something. That may be what you might want the media to believe. But there's other people that fall, too. Now, tell me, Jim, again. You're honestly going to say those helicopters didn't fire on any of us?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that those helicopters did not have mounted guns, okay? I'm not disputing the fact that there might have been fire from the helicopters. What I'm telling you is there was no mounted guns.
In this phone call, a couple days later, you can hear Steve Schneider negotiating to get his dad to the coroner's office. You can hear him pick up the phone and dial because at this point they were tapped by the FBI.
Yeah, you got some.
Oh boy, this crazy.
There you go.
Okay,
there you go. Listen, Pete, you can bring Pete out, sending an adult with him
for purposes of identifying the circumstances to the coroner's office, to explain to the coroner the circumstances surrounding why the body was there for this period of time and that sort of thing.
Hang on a minute. Dick?
Yeah.
David says, let's stop this kind of thing.
Stop what kind of thing?
I mean, you mentioned having an adult go along downtown or something to the coroner. I mean, if they choose to, that's one thing.
That's fine, to get one of your adults there that chooses to do that. I know full well that
but none of them want to do that. I mean, he asked already.
All right, then we'll have to forget about Pete for right now.
Okay, what we'll do then is we'll go bring him out and leave him out at the gate and just leave him there.
No, we can't. We're not going to do that either, okay?
If the Branch Davidians weren't willing to send somebody out to go to prison, they
Right.
wouldn't get their dead to the coroner's office. The man referenced in the phone call, Peter Gant, was cleaning the water tower at the time the raid began. Here you can see a helicopter forced to land due to Davidian fire, while another allegedly shoots Peter Gant as he exits the water tower to see what's happening. The FBI arrived on Mount Carmel on February 28th. They set up their command posts and put their negotiators in charge of communications with the people in the compound. Mount Carmel was stopped.
Keep watching, guys. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. This is really
interesting. The water
interesting.
supply had been crippled by the ATF the day before. The Branch Davidians were a resourceful people and would begin collecting rainwater in buckets as the siege played out that would allow them to withstand an extended stay. They also made a few calls to the media that had allowed them to get some of their side out to the public, something that the FBI couldn't allow. The phone lines to the compound were cut and rerouted to the FBI negotiators only. Not just that, the media was told that they had to move to an encampment 2 miles away, obscuring the backside of the compound, and they were also banned from speaking to the Branch Davidians at all. And despite all this, once tensions cooled, the negotiations started to turn around. That evening, Koresh told authorities that if a recorded message from him were played on a local radio station, KRLD, children would be released from the compound 2 by 2 each time it aired. The message was broadcast 2 times that night, and to his word, 2 children were released each broadcast. This continued the next day, which saw the broadcast play 5 more times and 10 more children were sent out,
Almost didn't make it.
totaling 14 kids. The following morning, Koresh arranged a surrender if another cassette tape that he recorded played at prime time the next day.
When you see those videos
That morning,
of Koresh when he's wearing the wife beater and he's wearing that mullet with no beard and up against the wall, that's after the initial attack, and he's gut shot at that point, and he's gut shot pretty bad. And they fully expected him to die if he didn't get medical treatment somewhere along the line, and the motherfucker never did.
more children and 2 elderly women exited the compound. The 2 women, however, were immediately arrested once out of sight.
Yep.
On the 4th day of the standoff, Koresh's tape was played over the radio between 1:30 and 2:30 p.m., hardly prime time by anybody's standards. They also caught a CNN broadcast that day that made them aware of the 2 arrests made the day before. Feeling slighted, the group within the compound gathered for a prayer session, after which Koresh said that God told him to wait. In order to smooth things over, the FBI convinced the U.S. Attorney's Office to drop the charges and hold them as material witnesses instead. But that goodwill would be undone almost immediately when the FBI began using their tanks to destroy property surrounding the compound, including a few cars.
So you got 2, so the FBI and the ATF that are there, and there's like, I don't remember exactly how it works, but there's like different divisions of each one. So you have like the negotiation team, right? That's trying to like create goodwill and negotiate a peaceful ending to this. And then you have this, like, for lack of a better term, like this attack team, right? This team that's there, that's like special ops. They're there. That's the snipers. the attack team, and they had brought in tanks at this point. And so they're not operating on the same page. And there's a power struggle between the two. So while there's good faith and negotiations going on, and they're trying to find a peaceful end to this to get people to come out and maybe wear them down a little bit, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, but the other team would do things that worked in like complete contradiction to that, which would like taking the tanks and driving over their vehicles, destroying their property, playing music or sounds at a crazy level just a crazy level and crazy sounds to try and drive them nuts all night, and which in a lot of ways like strengthen their resolve to not like surrender. It was just, it could not have been handled worse by opposing forces on the same side.
Go-karts, bikes, and a couple shacks. There seemed to be a disconnect between the negotiators and the troops on the ground, evident by this 911 call.
50 feet away from the one part of the building on the backside.
Too close is what you're telling me.
Oh, it's on the property. It's contrary to the word given.
Steve, every time we're aware of movement, we've told you about it.
Who's controlling these guys?
Give me a moment. See, sometimes people have different interests. The guys that gravitate toward, riding in tanks, jumping out of airplanes and stuff like that are a little different mindset than you and I.
With you.
Right?
I agree.
So when they get a chance to use a Bradley, probably half of them have never been in a Bradley before.
It reminded me of a lot of kids in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Opportunity to,
hey, let's drive this baby and see how it works.
Sure, but somebody's got to be above these guys.
Well,
those vehicles and what they're doing do not show what is coming out of the mouths of some of you guys.
Still, Koresh offered to release another child if he was allowed to hold Bible study without being interrupted. And to his word, Mark Jones was released immediately after, and his sister was released 2 days after that on March 5th. But soon the negotiations would begin to devolve into biblical sermons about the 7 seals of the apocalypse. Koresh left it up to his people to leave if they wanted to, and 12 adults would leave the compound over the next 18 days. But unlike the first 2 adults to come out, these 12 would be charged with conspiracy to commit murder of the 4 ATF agents and the 6 Branch Davidians that died on the first day.
So every one of them that comes out, no matter what they're told by the negotiators, they're arrested and charged with some pretty heavy crimes, right? So they're kind of lied to and told what's going to happen when they come out. They're arrested and charged with some really heavy crimes, which I guess they should be. But what happened was, it wasn't like that wasn't news. Of course that was news. So as soon as they saw that happen, everybody in the compound saw and knew that like they were being lied to, and they knew exactly what was going to happen to them if they gave up, if they just gave up and, like succumb to what the government was asking. And that's not what they were interested in. Fighting it out to the death was starting to look better and better and better.
March 5th, Koresh requested a suture kit for his gunshot wounds, a video of the children that had been released, and 6 gallons of milk for the remaining kids in the compound, all of which were granted. This was the day that the FBI decided to haul away Mike Schroeder's body as well, and because of this, Koresh also requested that Peter Gimp's decomposing body be respectfully removed from the top of the water tower, a chance to speak with the media, and for the Bradley tanks to be removed from the property. These fell on deaf ears. On the 7th day of the standoff, Koresh said he would release 6-year-old Melissa Morrison if he could speak with Robert Rodriguez, the undercover agent who had become close with Koresh. But he was told that Rodriguez was no longer in Waco, and no attempt was made to get him back, so she remained in the compound, where she would eventually perish.
Wow.
March 7th was a day full of disappointing negotiations consisting of 42 calls between the Branch Davidians and the negotiators that totaled 11 hours. First, Koresh said if the negotiators could show him the third seal, he would release more children, but he was unsatisfied with the interpretation on the other end of the line. Another member named Wayne Martin asked to speak to the press so that he could arrange a lawyer and press charges on the government, but he was denied. Yet another Davidian was willing to come out if she was promised she wouldn't be separated from her children and sent.
This was prominently displayed. She's got in the new Netflix documentary, her now speaking about her experience, and it was very, very interesting hearing from her and her experience.
Jail, and this was also a no. The Branch Davidians were finally allowed to retrieve the body of Peter Gant, and they were permitted to bury him in the front yard of the compound. Koresh was becoming fed up with the FBI negotiators and asked to speak to the Waco sheriff instead, who he knew personally. During their interaction, Koresh assured the sheriff that he would not commit suicide, and then he worked out a deal for more milk to be delivered, which he sent money out to pay for. That night, the Dividians sent out a tape that they wanted released to the public that showed the children inside the compound, but the FBI withheld the tape as they deemed it would make the Branch Davidians seem too sympathetic. On March 9th, about 2 a.m., the power was cut to the compound. Koresh told negotiators they relied on the power to listen to the daily press conferences and that he was done talking for good if it was not restored. The power came back on later that day, but it wouldn't last long. Judy Schneider, the woman who had been shot through the hand from above, was refused medical attention when she asked, and was told if she wanted it she would have to come out. When the power was finally restored, some of the Branch Davidians were listening to a radio station that mentioned if they had the ability, they should hang a banner or something out the window. Shortly after that, a large white sheet bearing "God help us, we want the press"
I remember that.
Was hung from one of the upper windows.
I didn't know it came from the radio station, but I remember that banner coming out. Wow, I forgot about
2 days later, Kathy Schroeder left the compound in order to be reunited with her children. She was
This was
allowed to call
fucking
the
sad.
compound and instill faith in the group that not everybody leaving was being arrested. So later that day, another member came out, but communications broke down again after Koresh heard on the radio that his mother was offered $75 grand for her life story.
Wow.
It was decided by the FBI, against the negotiators' advice, that the power would be cut for good that night. The negotiators argued that 2 people had come out and it would only hurt the process, but they were ignored because the approaching night was going to be the coldest thus far, and freezing them out was the FBI's preferred option. In order to maintain a little bit of light or heat within the house, the Branch Davidians were forced to distribute gas cans and gas lanterns to people throughout the compound. A gas generator may have also been used to light a small portion of the property. It was also that night that the psychological warfare began. Large lights were set up to
This
shine
is what I
inside
was
the
talking
compound
about.
while speakers blared a barrage of ear-piercing sounds. The
Two
idea
things
was to torture
simultaneously
those
happening,
within.
right? Being told one thing. Doesn't this sound like the government? Being told one thing, and all the while they're doing exactly the opposite to make you think something different and proving to you that they're fucking liars, which they were, which they absolutely were.
By not allowing them any rest of any kind. The negotiators were also barred from calling into the compound and only allowed to speak to the Dividians if they called out. March 13th saw no communication at all, and on March 14th, both the people who exited the compound 2 days earlier called in to urge the group out. That night, more lights were added around the compound to intensify the psychological effects on those within. On March 18th, the FBI began bulldozing materials around the compound, including a woodpile, a dump truck, and a few fuel tanks. Koresh came to the phone on March 19th.
Man, they got
assuring
boned
the
up when they had those
negotiators
tanks.
They asked that he was
Completely
not going
boned
to
up.
kill himself. And he asked that they not destroy any more of the Davidians' property.
It is their
He
property.
stated that a new moon was coming, and they would be coming out.
I think crushing
but
the
he
El
needed more
Camino threw them
time.
over the top.
They also received a copy of the ATF search warrant that day, something they'd requested several days earlier. At 10 o'clock that night, Brad Branch and Kevin Whitcliffe exited the compound. These two men had been planning to leave the compound on March 12th before the power had been turned off. Later that day, Koresh again disavowed any intention to commit suicide. The FBI agreed to turn off the loudspeaker the next day, a Saturday, in honor of the Davidians' Sabbath, a sign of goodwill. In response to the gesture the day before, like so many other times goodwill was utilized, people came out. The morning of March 21st,
We're gonna see. I hope they show
Rita
it.
Riddle
Timothy
and Gladys
McVeigh
Ottman
showed up.
exited the compound. Later that afternoon, Sheila Martin and Ophelia Santoyo came out as well. Sheila Martin was allowed to call back in to speak with her husband David Martin. But that evening, negotiators were informed that the scene commander had decided to allow clearing of vehicles around the compound.
See, they're coming out a little at a time in spite of, right? But it's not going fast enough for the government. There was a lot of heat on the government on why you didn't end this, why you didn't end this. They got these opposing forces coming in, right? There's a proper way to handle it with, and there's people coming out, right? Every day a little bit more, but it's not fast enough. And the pressure to close this case and wrap it up is becoming too intense for like the scene commander and like CERT type teams.
The negotiators were vehemently opposed to this decision, arguing that just as on March 12th, it would harm negotiations to have negative actions taken when many people had come out, and there had even been talks that more people were coming out the next day. A pattern seemed to be arising. When the Dividians cooperated, it would be followed by intimidation, almost like getting people out wasn't really the goal.
Right.
That night, the FBI smashed and cleared more cars and played loud Tibetan chants on the loudspeaker,
You know,
using
that
the
offended 'em.
external floodlights to their full advantage. The same pattern you may be picking up on was also noticed by Steve Schneider the next day, who complained to the negotiators that the last time people came out, the power was cut, and this time they were rewarded with loud music. Later that day, the FBI sent in a letter for Koresh that told him that if he and his people surrendered, he could continue to teach them while they were incarcerated. But after the previous night, Koresh didn't believe a word of it.
I mean, why would he believe that?
The loudspeakers and lights were in full force yet again that night.
Right?
A man named Livingstone Fagan was sent out the next morning. Koresh was worried about what the ATF and the FBI would do to them, so Fagan was sent out to act as a witness to whatever happened. He was the last Branch Davidian to leave.
Wow.
Later that day, Steve Schneider told the negotiators that if
I wonder where that dude is now.
done all of the negative things, such as cutting the power, shining the bright lights, playing the music, 20 people would have been out. But now you may as well come in and take his carcass out of here, he said. The psyops continued that night, late into the next morning.
Psyops is the right term.
The FBI began to use the daily press briefings as an opportunity to attack Koresh.
This dude's a fucking dick. Okay, I forget his name, but he's a fucking piece of shit. I'm telling you that right now.
calling him a coward who hides behind children. Sometime that night, a religious fanatic who had been keeping up on the news named Luis Alanes snuck past the perimeter and all of the guards into Mount Carmel. He knocked on the door and was let in, and when Steve Schneider was told to send him out, he refused. The FBI seemed to be done negotiating and started to make demands. They ordered the release of 20 people by 4 p.m., but nobody was released by the deadline, so the FBI cleared a motorcycle and some go-karts from the grounds.
Fucking
On March 26th, negotiator Speaker Schneider demanded that 10 people must come out by noon. Steve Schneider got upset and told them these people don't care, you can kill us, whatever. These people fear God, not you. Once he calmed down, he spoke to the people inside about leaving if they wanted, but nobody budged and the deadline passed yet again. This time the FBI cleared vehicles and trees from around the compound and told Schneider that nobody would be permitted to leave the compound, now completely dropping the idea that they wanted to get people out. This would include even walking to the courtyard to feed the group's chickens, which had been allowed from time to time. The incompetence of the people outside the compound was put on full display yet again when another fanatic from California named Jesse Amon snuck past the line of feds and into the compound.
I didn't know any of this shit happened.
Like the time before, authorities attempted to demand the man out, but they could not make contact of any kind that evening or the next morning.
I didn't know anybody snuck in. I didn't know any of that.
The reason communication fell off became clear on the morning of March 27th, when members of the Branch Davidians hung a large banner out the window that said, "Tanks broke phone line." Once the line had been repaired, the FBI went back to mandating the release of 10 people by a certain time, and again, the deadline was not met, so the FBI bulldozed the front fence of the compound.
You don't do what we say, we're going to bulldoze your stuff.
As it was reported in the day's press conference that Kathy Schroeder, who had previously left, been reunited with her kids and was used to call into her husband to express how well she was treated, was now being charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Previously, she'd only been a material witness. Steve Schneider spent most of that day on the telephone.
You see in the Netflix documentary, and they have video of it, like she's reunited with her child. They used her child as a leverage tool. They sent in video, and then they used phone calls and her child, of her very small child, and her being worried about her child as a pry bar to get her out of the compound. She didn't want to come out of the compound. So she agrees and she comes out of the compound, and she believes that she's going to be reunited with her child, and like she is not going to be charged the way she's charged. I'm going to sneeze. One. So they reunite her with her child, and while she's with her child, they're asking her questions because they know that they can use her to get information about what's going on in there. As soon as they get information from her, they literally take her child away from her and lock her the fuck up. Like, and straight to like a federal prison.
With negotiators. He said he didn't even care about the property damage anymore because he was going beyond this world. Schneider threatened that if the Dividians really wanted to kill the FBI agents, they could have done it at any time, and said that the FBI could burn the compound down or kill them. He didn't care. He went on to say that because of how they'd reneged on the treatment of Kathy Schroeder, separating her from her children and charging her, he highly doubted anybody else was coming out.
Yep.
However, when he was asked, Schneider affirmed that he was not going to commit suicide by saying, "Of course not. If I did, I'd be lost eternally." Negotiators would ask Koresh the same thing the next day. If we were going to commit suicide, he said, we'd have been dead a long time ago.
Right. I mean, you're 30 days into
They
this.
then demanded that 10 people come out by 12:50, but like every demand they made before, it was not met by the Davidians. Several more fanatics tried to sneak in as well that day, but they were all apprehended. Koresh finally got a lawyer out to the compound on March 29th. Dick DeGuerin was allowed to approach
I think his
the front
mom
door of the
hired the
compound
lawyer.
and have a private conversation with Koresh. He would return the following 2 days and would be allowed to enter Mount Carmel both times. DeGuerin returned again on April 1st with a second lawyer who had been hired by the family of Steve Schneider. When they exited the compound, they were questioned by the FBI and said that Koresh was preparing his people to exit after their Passover, but it was unknown when this would be. The lawyers also informed them that they'd advised the Branch Davidians not to speak with law enforcement. The two lawyers went in again on April 4th, and again they were questioned after by the FBI. They said they still weren't sure when Passover was, but that the group was making a plan to exit. Koresh would come out first, followed by the women and children, and then the remaining members and Schneider, who would leave last after organizing the group's exit. Sometime after the lawyers left, fanatic Jesse Amon, who had snuck into Mount Carmel about a week earlier, exited the compound. While speaking with negotiators on April 6th, Steve Schneider told them that Passover would start at sundown that night and would last 7 days. In a show of disrespect for the group's Passover, the FBI continued their PSYOPs operations.
Why would you not
flashbangs
think
at anybody
that
who stepped out into the courtyard?
Of
They
course
had
you...
changed tactics yet again, back to not letting anybody leave. In defiance of their own negotiators' advice, the FBI, ATF, and Attorney General Janet Reno began to devise a plan to gas those inside. Coincidentally, just a few months earlier in January of 1993, CS gas was banned from warfare by those who signed the UN's chemical weapons ban, which included the US, and Janet Reno had a whole stockpile of military gas that she was itching to get rid of.
It was banned to be used in military conflicts, and we use it against U.S. citizens. I want you to remember that they're all U.S. citizens. All the people in the compound, U.S. citizens.
Between the group and negotiators remained scarce, but on April 9th, a call was made by Steve Schneider to complain that the agents were flipping off and mooning the women inside, flashbanging anybody they could, and had spent part of the day rolling over Peter Gint's grave with a tank.
I mean, if you got guys out there right now pulling their pants down, men that are mature, they're sticking their butts out in the air and flipping the finger.
I have no idea who that is, and whoever that is should be fired. And if we can find out, we will fire them.
But the spirit and the attitude of these men of yours, the last 5 days, your people have run that grave over, and definitely the tracks have sunk a couple feet. The body's probably crushed. I know it's going to have to be exhumed.
But Steve, I mentioned to you yesterday that that wasn't intentional.
Fuck.
On April 10th, the compound was surrounded by razor wire to prevent anybody going in or coming out. Steve Schneider called yet again to inform law enforcement that he never said when the group was actually coming out, probably upset by the insulting actions taking place intentionally during their Passover. And technically he was right, he told his lawyer. On April 12th, the gas plan was confirmed by those in charge as the plan of action if the Branch Davidians didn't come out after their Passover ended on the 13th, something they probably knew would be the case. I should note now that there are strict guidelines for CS gas use domestically. These include firing tear gas from a distance, only using it outdoors, and using the lowest possible strength chemical mix because it can incapacitate or even kill If it's not able to disperse, it is also highly flammable.
Highly
Ignoring
flammable.
these guidelines, they plan to pump it into the compound from several angles, claiming the goal was to flush out the Branch Davidians through a non-contaminated section of the compound. On April 13th, Koresh refused to speak to his attorney, but Schneider told him it was the last day of their Passover. No one came out.
So we're 45 days into it. Koresh is very, very injured. The people are worn out and they're done. Could you imagine 45 days in that compound under those horrific conditions? What your mentality must be like, both physically, mentally, and spiritually, how broken you have to be for that to be the case. 45 days into it, like, they're done. They're cooked. They do not think it's going to end peacefully at this point. And why should they?
On April 14th, Koresh agreed to speak to his attorney once again, and he explained that they would come out, but only after he finished a manuscript on the 7 seals of the apocalypse.
That's
He
fucking
told him he
crazy.
thought it would take about 2 weeks. Later in the day, he began a 5-hour preaching marathon with negotiators over the phone. That day, the plan to gas the compound was elevated to a constant and complete insertion of CS, regardless of the horrific side effects to those within. They also insisted that it needed to happen soon because the hostage negotiation team had been there too long. On April 16th, in an attempt to keep them in the loop, it was reported to negotiators that David Koresh was already on the 2nd seal. The next day, probably sensing shit was about to hit the fan, Louis Alanes, the first fanatic that had snuck into the compound earlier in the standoff, finally came out. On Sunday, April 18th, Janet Reno approved the CS assault plan and told President Bill Clinton of her decision. The remaining Branch Davidian cars on the compound were destroyed and moved that day in preparation so the tanks could move freely during the assault. A false sense of confidence was granted that evening to the Dividians when negotiators delivered more.
Right? So they're basically, what they're doing with these tanks for like 30 days is they're preparing for the assault, right? Always understanding there's going to be an assault. They're preparing for the assault. They're clearing away things. They're making it hard. They're preparing the field of battle, right? You see that. We see that, right?
Milk and a typewriter ribbon for Koresh to continue his 7 Seals manuscript, something the FBI knew he wouldn't have a chance to do. The next morning, at 6 a.m. on April 19th, the gas assault started. The negotiators called in to explain what was happening and that they could come out peacefully. In response, Steve Schneider ripped the phone from the wall and smashed it
To
against
the American
front
flag
door.
at the top of the tank.
The barrels
As they
of
attacked
CS gas arrived.
American
The chemical
citizens
came in powder
on
form
American soil.
and needed to be mixed with the liquid.
On private property.
The liquid chosen was methylene chloride, another highly flammable compound that is also lethal. You may know it by its other name, paint stripper. The delivery method chosen was to use tanks to poke holes in vital parts of the building, tearing some sections down entirely, and pump the deadly mixture inside. Over the next 6 hours, they filled the compound. The Branch Davidians tried to fire back and defend themselves, but it was useless against the heavily.
Okay, this is where my brain hurts from this fucking thing. Like, there's nobody I like here, okay? There's innocent children, women, and men in that building. Right? There are. I mean, are they innocent in everything? No. But they're not David Koresh, okay? David Koresh was a fucking monster. But he's one of 100 people in the building. I don't like the religious fanaticism. I don't like any of that stuff. I don't like the cultism and all those things. I don't enjoy any of that. And they had illegal guns, and they had illegal firearms and hand grenades and all that, and they were complicit in the abuse of children, the sexual abuse of children, and yes, all of that's true. So I don't, but there's some innocence there. It doesn't mean that they deserved what they got, okay? But I don't enjoy them. But holy fuck, I hate the government in this. This is why this thing is so I have such conflict with this particular event in American history, is because I basically hate and have empathy for everybody on all fucking sides. And it just causes me so much fucking internal like angst, right? Like fuck the ATF and fuck the FBI, but fuck David Koresh and fuck those parents. I mean, it's like they're just rolling in with tanks though, shooting deadly fucking gas into the building.
Armored tanks. They tried to create Molotov cocktails with the gas they had left.
They did.
In hopes to use it when the compound was finally breached, only adding more flammables to the hellish conditions within. They attempted to protect themselves from the massive amounts of gas surging into their home from multiple areas by strapping on gas masks. Unfortunately, these were useless for the children inside, as they were too large to seal against their small faces.
Poor kids.
The children were rushed to the underground bunker in an attempt to avoid exposure, but the thermal imagery being used by law enforcement planes above meant there was nowhere to hide. Gas began being pumped into the bunker from above before a tank rolled over it and crumbled the concrete roof down on top of those inside, killing many children within. As the tanks moved around the compound, the FLIR, or forward-looking infrared cameras on the planes above, captured what looked like gunfire coming from agents on top of the tanks and in other spots around the building. The tanks tore into the gym, not to poke holes, but to destroy the structure entirely.
Right.
Maiming and viciously killing those within with their tank treads. Something that can be seen from later autopsies that identified large portions of their bodies ripped away. One PC.
Yeah, we just rolled in with fucking tanks. Don't tell me the U.S. government doesn't do shit like this. Same thing we do it in other countries. This is when it happened in our fucking country, right? We do this shit in other countries, right? We did it in our country to our citizens. Law breaking or not, they fucking rolled over that bunker with those children in it and crushed the roof down on top of them, right? They did that. They knew they were doing that. It's not like they didn't know the fucking bunker was there. They'd been outside for 51 years doing recon, 51 days doing recon. They absolutely knew what they were doing. They were just done with it.
Jammed the tread of a tank, requiring a combat engineering vehicle to tow the tank away. And in a final act of malice or incompetence, the FBI fired incendiary gas canisters using a grenade launcher into the structure, as if it needed any more gas. The more conspiratorial among us might wonder if it was actually the incendiary mechanism that they were after, because the caustic mixture of flammables inside went ablaze.
Whoa.
These canisters were fired from near the tanks, which set at least one of their gas pumps on fire.
Right.
Several of these gas grenades with an incendiary mechanism were found expended within the compound's rubble afterwards. According to the local fire marshal, the several holes that had been torn in the compound served as air tunnels to quickly intensify the fire, like a potbelly stove.
I don't think for one fucking minute it's incompetence. I think that this engineered. They knew exactly what they were doing. They got tired of it. They got tired of being there. And they just killed everybody and burned it the fuck down. That's what the government did. That's what the fucking ATF did. That's what the FBI did. That's what the fucking federal government did. They got tired of it and they just fucking burned it down. They crushed everybody and burned it down with all the people inside and went like this and on to the next fucking thing.
It was a windy day, and in his opinion, without flammables at all. Even the smallest fire within would spread rapidly out of control.
And they did it on a
and
windy
be
day,
nearly
knowing.
impossible to extinguish.
And that's exactly what happened.
The fire burned as the media looked on in horror from 2 miles away through their telephoto lenses.
A few people managed to scamper out on the right side of the building. They were burnt, but alive.
The fire raged on, and it looked like
This is when that
there was
Thibodeau
no way
guy came
anybody
out.
else
Big
would
man.
survive. But then there was
Holy
a moment of relief as reporters saw 20 to 30 people exiting the building.
What we know is on the flip side that there are between 25 and 30 survivors.
With our long-range camera, we did see some people scurrying out. We couldn't tell how many. It was shortly after that that we heard that there were 20 people who had come out. It was after that that we heard from the Justice Department over the wires that they were saying there were only 8. They are probably being careful and understating things for the beginning. Let's hope so.
What they couldn't see from their angle, and what the FLIR camera above could, was what looked suspiciously like 2 men shooting in the direction of the people coming out. But at least one of them heard it, and maybe you can too.
Wow. Here's
Did you hear that? I don't know.
This is a really, really good fucking documentary with a lot of information. It's called 51 Days in Waco, the story of the Branch Davidians. After I'm done with the live stream, I'll go back and edit. I'm gonna put this in the links so you guys can go back and watch it. This is a really good expose of what the fuck really happened.
As hard as this particular fire may have been to put out, nobody would get a chance to try, because when the fire units approached the scene to help put out the blaze, they were not permitted to do so by the FBI for their own safety. Assuming this was referring to possible gunfire coming from within and not the fires that they were trained to put out. It's interesting that this had not stopped the ATF from calling in their own ambulances during the first day of the raid, when both sides were firing wildly at one another.
As a final fuck you to the Branch Davidians, they replaced the Branch Davidian flag that burnt off the flagpole with an ATF flag.
As the fire burned
need to
itself
say
out
more?
and came to a whimper, the FBI's tanks were used to push all the debris into the center like a massive fire pit. A gross dereliction of duty, as this was clearly destruction of evidence and the most egregious contamination of a crime scene that one could imagine.
Why? Why do that?
81
Obviously.
Branch Davidians would die
81.
on April 19th, 1993. The 9 people that managed to escape were grabbed by authorities, treated on the spot, and arrested. They, and many of the other people that came out of the compound during the 51 days, would receive between 5 and 40 years. The official story given was that over the 51 days, not a single FBI agent fired a shot, and no ATF agents fired from the helicopters during the initial raid. And on the final conclusion, it was the Branch Davidians who set the fire within, and those that didn't die from the
They
fire
still say that to
committed
this day.
suicide. But there's a few oddities to this story. Many autopsies show death by blunt force trauma, body mutilation, or gunshots to the torso, and many of these come out in the House investigation of the Waco siege in 1995. Initially, 2 ATF agents were caught lying about their stories and were fired, but when they threatened to talk and break their gag order, they were quickly rehired by the agency.
As far as you can tell, correct?
That's correct.
And the
I didn't know that.
These people, these 2 gentlemen lied, and that they lied to
I didn't know that.
investigators, and that they changed documents, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And yet you rehired them.
Fuck you.
We did hire them back.
Fuck you.
As you're aware, under the civil service rules, if an individual is fired for cause, they have that opportunity to appeal to the Merit Systems Protection Board, at which time the decision can be taken out of our hands. We believed it was in the best interest of the government to rehire those individuals, keeping in mind that we rehired them no longer as supervisor special agents, no
Fuck
longer
you.
with the authority to lead special agents,
And you, and you, and you, and you,
Those facts were true.
Yes, sir.
and you.
With regard to each man, you stated that you found that the charges warranted removal from federal service, and that, quote, a lesser penalty would be inadequate, and that removal is necessary to promote the efficiency of the federal service. Mr. Sarabin had honored a, quote, gag order imposed by Director McGaugh, but that if he was removed from the federal service, he would talk. And in fact, Agent Winowski himself told you that he has another side to the story that has not come out, but that he believed that it was in the best interests of the VATF not to go forward with the story, and he mentioned a specific incident, and he had stated that the most critical parts of the incidents were witnessed by himself, Kavanaugh, Sarabin, and Royster, and he said, quote, the successful prosecution of the Branch Davidians is all they have left to offer. I ask you, Mr. Black, what did they know that, in their view, could have undermined the prosecution and that they would keep quiet about if they were rehired? You don't know what that is?
I don't know what that is, no, sir.
Bullshit.
The ATF also tried to use Robert Rodriguez, their undercover agent, as a scapegoat until he sued them and got them to admit that he did everything he could.
Man, know what I told him, and they knew exactly what I meant. And instead of coming up and admitting to the American people right after the raid that they had made a mistake, that the element of surprise had been lost, that the agent had advised them that they knew they were coming, instead of doing that, they lied to the public. And in doing so, they just about destroyed a very great agency.
Another oddity would be that Paul Gray, the chief fire investigator for Waco, used to office in the same building as the ATF, where his wife worked. There was one underage girl named Carrie Jewell who came out saying that she was molested by Koresh, but her mother was there and she did not agree. She testified against Mark Bro when he gave his initial statements, and we know how honest that goofy-eyed guy is. The FLIR footage I showed tonight was completely ignored by the investigation committee, led by Chuck Schumer. Many people showed up to protest the treatment of the Branch Davidians, but you might be interested to know that one of them was a man named Timothy McVeigh. And the last oddity I'm going to get into tonight, for all you people looking to add your Clinton body count, wouldn't it be interesting to know that these 3 men entering the window in the initial raid all perished, and they were all presidential bodyguards for Bill.
No shot.
It'd be nice to know what happened to them, but unfortunately, this is how the video was released, with the awkward cut, and no idea how much time passes before the ATF agent behind them is shooting in the window. There's a lot more down this rabbit hole, but that's where I'm gonna leave it. If you're still with me, thank you for staying tuned. I'm gonna skip right to my patrons. Big love to Buckethead, Tang, Shane Stangy, Jacob Cruz,
Holy shit. Did we learn some shit tonight or today or what? That was wild. That last section was wild. There was a ton there that I did not know. There was a ton there that I did not know. Well, hey man, we've been going 2 hours. That's pretty good for me. That's like 1,000,000 hours of streaming for me. I appreciate you guys that are still here watching. Love each and every one of you. Follow me. You can find me on YouTube, TikTok, Insta, Twitch, and Twitter. I don't have much following on some of those. A few of the others, I've got much more. I hope you follow me on your favorite platform. I'd love to have you. I am going to go spend the rest of this beautiful Saturday with my family and have a very good weekend. I hope you do the same thing. I love each and every one of you, and we'll see you next time. Namaste. Be well.